Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from Matthew's gospel, the 4th chapter. And listen now, friends, for the word of the Lord. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, 'One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve only him.'" Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God indeed. So Lucy approaches Charlie Brown one day with a scroll. And she says, "I've got something for you, Charlie Brown. This should be a big help. I've made up a list of all your faults." And Charlie Brown looks at the scroll, and as he's looking at it, it unrolls completely, and it fills the whole panel of the comic strip. And Lucy says, "Once I got going, it was hard to know when to stop." Some people are in our lives to keep us from getting too proud. And that's good. That's a good thing. Proverbs tells us that pride comes before a fall. The first sin, the fall, we read about today. Carolyn read it for us about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how Adam and Eve and Adam ate the fruit of that tree. And after that reading that Carolyn read for us, a few verses after that, God says to the heavenly host, "See, the humans have become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now they might reach out their hands and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." And this was a problem. And that was one of the reasons, therefore, humans were banished from the garden, right? Because if humans become like one of us, that is the heavenly host, if we become like gods, we're not really ready for that, are we? It goes to our heads. We're talking about pride and the destructive force that pride is. When we realize that we have things, or we are things, or we can do things that we're really not ready for. You know, those things that we might be able to do, these capabilities that we might find that we have, but we're not really able to control the desire to use them sometimes. There's a story about James and John, those wonderful sons of thunder, two of Jesus's innermost circle of disciples, right? If Jesus went anywhere off by himself with just a few people, it'd usually be with Peter, James, and John. James and John had ambitions, and usually the 12 disciples are referred to in the Gospels as the 12. The 12 went with him. The 12 were here doing this. The 12 did that. There is one instance, though, in Matthew and in Mark where they're referred to as the 10 and the 2. that happened after James and John exhibited their pride and asked Jesus if they could sit on his right and left hand in his glory. Their pride, their ambition threatened to rock the band of disciples and actually split the disciples into two. That's why the story of Jesus' temptation is so important. It's so impressive, and it's so humbling. As a human being, as we all are humans, it's so humbling to think that Jesus could withstand these temptations. Only God could do that. And do you see that? This is the one, God, Jesus, the Son of God, God, human and divine, the one with the right to brag, the one with the right to take what he wants. Jesus is the one who doesn't. He doesn't fall into that temptation. He doesn't give in to his pride. He remains humble. And humility is something we're talking about today. We have been talking the last couple of weeks about these 7 words that the session of the church about a month ago chose to be guiding words for the church in the coming months. And those words, you may recall, we've talked about some of them. We talked about clarity and together and delight. And this week we're talking about humility, and we'll also talk about inclusivity, outreach, and courage. But today we're talking about humility, and we see that Jesus, again, indeed, was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. And he was tempted by earthly things that we know, like food after he fasted for 40 days. But notice that little dig, if you are the Son of God. It's not just food that's tempting Jesus here. It's pride. Of course, I'm the Son of God. I'll show you. It's a very human response, wouldn't it be? That's not Jesus' response. Though fully God and fully human, that's not his response. Or provision from the Father in uncertain times. How often do we really just want God to tell us it's all going to be okay? Or we want to test God that it will be okay. Or everything in the world, that's a pretty big temptation. Maybe none come bigger than that. And if we look at these things, by all rights, these things already belong to and are Jesus's. Just wasn't necessarily best for him to take and have those things at that time. And it certainly wasn't best for Jesus to deny worship of God the Father, of the rest of the Godhead, right? And so Jesus demonstrates his humility in not taking what's his, and not claiming it in that moment, and not showing the tempter who's boss. There's so much at stake because remember, this is the one who knew no sin, who would bear our sin. It's so important that he shows us what humility is. It's also so important that he would be proven to be worthy as a son of the inheritance of the Father, that we then could also inherit as brothers and sisters of him. Now, I encountered a few years back a test on pride, and I think it's a good little exercise. I don't know, we've been doing these exercises throughout this sermon series, kind of trying on our different words of the day, and this is actually not a test on humility, it's a test on pride, but I guess that is also a test of humility when we're testing pride, right? So I wonder if you just silently, don't say this out loud, I won't ask anybody to incriminate themselves, but I wonder if you'll just kind of answer for yourself if these things ring true for you. Now remember, there are different personality types, and pride works at all of us in different ways. So some of these you'll hear and say, oh, that's not me at all, and it won't be, and that's great. But some of them you'll hear and go, oh, maybe. All right, so just be honest with yourself. I enjoy being the center of attention, yes or no? I think I deserve the best. Much of my conversation is filled with I, me, or my. I find it difficult to admit that I'm wrong. I seldom pass a mirror without looking at myself. I'm stubborn. I don't like to be corrected or to change. My feelings are easily hurt. I am impatient with other people's mistakes. I don't get enough appreciation for what I do. I'm offended if I render a service and don't receive a thank you. I seldom ask for help because I can do the job better myself. I feel pretty good that I didn't check yes to every question leading up till now. If you're that last one, you are doing pretty good. You know, these are just some of the ways, though, aren't they, that pride works at us. Pride works in a variety of ways, and it gets in there, and it can be deceptive. And pride is often attached to good things about us, right? That we begin to live into and find our identity in more than we find our identity in God's love for us. That's pride, and it works on us differently. But let's not just condemn pride. Let's focus on the goal, which is humility. The goal is humility because humility builds community. Do you see that? Humility builds community. Deeper relationships with other people is only really possible when we have a certain amount of humility. Because humility builds up what pride tears down. And humility is essential in seeking unity as a church. And we said that we want unity, not uniformity as a church, right? Well, to have that, we have to have humility. And that's why Session identified it as one of these 7 words that we're seeking to live out. So there's a story, a beautiful story about humility that is told about Sergeant James Allen Ward and Winston Churchill. James Allen Ward was awarded the Victoria Cross during World War II. Early in the war, 1941, he was in a Wellington bomber that one of its engines caught fire, and he actually had other crew members tie a rope around his waist, climbed out on the wing of the plane, up in the air, 13,000 feet. Did I say it was flying? Climbed out on the wing, put the fire out, climbed back in the wing, and saved the lives of everybody in that airplane. A few months later, when he was honored, Winston Churchill wanted to receive him as a guest, and so Sergeant Ward, we are told, was just struck dumb in Winston Churchill's presence. He couldn't say anything. And so Churchill approached him and said, "You must feel very humble and awkward in my presence." "Yes, sir," answered Ward. "Then you can imagine," replied Churchill, "how humble and awkward I feel in yours." Pride divides. Humility builds bridges. It unites. It connects. It honors. It builds bridges between us and each other, and it builds bridges between us and God. And thank Christ for his humility, which certainly built a bridge between us and God. And let us together ask Christ to help us all live in that same humble way. Amen.